Hello there, my name's Brandon and I make pictures out of tiny squares. And every year since I started making pixel art, I make a new sprite of Luke Skywalker based on his appearance in Return of the Jedi. At first, remaking a character like this was a great way to see how my skills might have progressed over the year. But at a certain point, it kind of morphed into just being this fun tradition, and I tend to do it at the end of the year, so it kind of like sums up the whole year for me in a sense. And I just like exploring all these different expressions and styles that a pixel art sprite can take. I didn't actually set out from day one with the intention that this was even going to be a thing, or that Jedi Luke specifically was going to be the subject of this exercise. It was more just in those earlier years, I would often remake sprites that I had already done, because maybe I had learned a little bit more and I could see small ways that I could improve them and try to redo it. And Star Wars characters have always been one of the things that I tend to come back to for that. So I noticed back in 2018 when I found myself making yet another Luke Skywalker sprite that this was actually the only character or sprite that I had a version of from every single calendar year since I started making pixel art in 2015. It wasn't Farm Boy Luke, it wasn't Empire Strikes Back Luke, it wasn't any other original character or design that I had revisited this much as this particular sprite apparently. So I popped all these together into this evolution diagram. And then from that moment, it's become this sort of yearly tradition that I just like to keep going. At this point, it's just kind of absurd and continues to be even more absurd that I've just made this many versions of the exact same character. But I also love it, and I think it's kind of an interesting experiment that I just need to keep doing for as long as I continue to make pixel art. And now this year, being 2024, is going to be the 10th entry into this series. So it feels like this is a time to make something a little bit extra special in order to celebrate this particular milestone. One of the things I've always wanted to incorporate into one of these Skywalkers is to find a way to make some artwork that's based on a certain deleted scene from Return of the Jedi. And it's one where we actually get to see Luke completing his lightsaber in a cave on Tatooine. I really like this premise of him completing his lightsaber, and then in fact later on in the film there's a great scene when Luke surrenders and he's having this chat with Vader on a walkway, and there's a few lines from Vader about Luke's new lightsaber where he says, I see... Should I do the voice? I won't. I'll do the voice. So Vader, they're on the walkway and he says, I see you have... Okay, Vader on the walkway, he says,
I see you have constructed a new lightsaber. Your skills are complete. Indeed, you are powerful, as the Emperor has foreseen.
Sorry, I'm not good at impressions. But the point being, I'd like to find some way to wrap these two ideas together into one cohesive piece of pixel art. I think an interesting way to achieve this is going to be to make a pixel art comic or manga style page, and the layout can take us through Vader's lines of dialogue. This will obviously have some imagery too, like I was thinking Vader in his meditation chamber, and some artwork related to the lightsaber build and the setting of Tatooine. And then also, of course, include a sprite of Luke that will be this year's entry into the Sprite series. This format came to mind because my favorite project from this past year, other than announcing our video game, I suppose, was actually the pixel art poster that I made for the anniversary of The Phantom Menace. And for that one, I actually remember that the placement of the text, like the size of the text, that was sort of one of the critical factors just in terms of the visual constraints of making something like this. If I recall correctly, I got relatively lucky with being able to fit that tagline into the poster. But I'm not going to take any chances this time, so I'm actually going to start by drawing out all the lettering first, and then we can see what kind of resolution we would need to accommodate this text. So the letters that I'm making are 3x5 pixels each, which for me is one of the smaller pixel fonts that you can make that still is able to maintain some sort of clear legibility to it. And the way that I like to make these letters is just by counting out all the little 3x5 blocks first, and then carving each one into the letter for that particular word and line of dialogue. Now, if we zoom out and look at this on the full page layout, and this is a canvas size of 112 by 168 pixels, which was the resolution of the Phantom Menace poster, we can see that this is quite tight for space, especially since there's going to be a couple more lines of dialogue, not just this. So instead of using this sizing, I'm going to increase my canvas dimensions to 200 by 270 pixels. And this sizing I've used before in a similar way when I did the Magic Knight Rayearth manga page redraw. And now that first line of dialogue can actually fit across the page in one single line. And if I bring the other bits of dialogue in, we'll see that that's more or less the case for those ones too. I think the last line is pushing it a bit into the margins, but instead of increasing the canvas again, I think we can just try splitting those up and making it part of the cadence of the layout to work with them being like disjointed like that. The important part is that I found when you're making these sort of pixel art layouts, it is best to figure out how much space to account for the lettering first, because it'd be rough to make all the artwork to a smaller canvas size and then find out you don't have room for the letters at all, and it usually is just a mess to try to resize and redraw everything at that stage. So now that that's all worked out, the layout is ready for detailing, and we can treat each of those little isolated areas as their own smaller pieces of artwork that just need to be filled in. Which I guess is just kind of a long way of describing what comic panels are. But all I mean by this is just that we now know also like what the resolution and the space that we're working with for all these little panel spots. So this top panel is going to be Vader sitting in his meditation chamber. This is also part of that deleted scene, and it's kind of what leads right into seeing Luke in the cave. And it shows Vader reaching out to Luke to like tempt him to the dark side. So I've just taken that together with the dialogue from later in the film, and it's almost like Vader sort of sensing through the Force what Luke is up to with building the lightsaber. Now, in terms of recreating the meditation chamber, I'm going for this stylized silhouetted approach. So looking at this reference images here, I was noticing how that pattern of the white light is creating this almost like zigzaggy M shape in the background, if you can kind of see that. So I'm doing sort of a tidier version of that idea, starting with this white on black look. And in order for this page to sort of fully carry the feel of being a manga where there's at least a suggestion of kind of a grayscale shading to the whole thing, I'm going to introduce this midpoint gray tone. And this is going to help bridge that gap between the black and the white and just kind of add a bit more depth as far as achieving like a shading. I'm also playing around with dotting it into the corners of these silhouettes, and it's sort of like softening those things. And just from this light of a treatment, it's just, one more color, but it really ups the fidelity in quite a nice way. Underneath Vader is going to be a small strip of the landscape of Tatooine. And this is mainly here just to kind of take up a bit of that space between the dialogue panels, but it also provides that sort of establishing shot of the setting of Tatooine being the place where Luke is at the time that Vader is kind of connected to him through the Force. To make a more natural transition from the meditation chamber panel into the landscape, I'm going to place the twin suns and a few like squiggly cloud shapes that just kind of gently break up what was otherwise the flat edge of that original panel. There was still a bit of space off to the right, so I've squeezed in a bit of Jabba's palace just to allude to the rest of that scene from early on in the movie. The next panel is going to focus on the idea of Luke having constructed his lightsaber. And to capture that, I'm going to make a cutaway diagram that shows all the interior components of the lightsaber hilt. And this is really the reason that I've had this idea to do something with this deleted scene for so long. I just thought kind of this idea of the lightsaber diagram being incorporated into some kind of artwork related to this would just be really cool. And in this case, it also happens to work out well as being like a visual element that kind of works into the flow of the page, I think, too. As far as what's actually going on here, I'm not sure what the most accurate canon references are for like the lightsaber structural components. The given is that there's usually, or there needs to be some sort of like crystal inside, maybe some lenses and other things that just generally look like electrical wiring or something to that effect. This one here, that's an actual like replica photo, I believe comes from one of the Star Wars visual dictionaries. And then there's also this hand-drawn one of what I'm assuming to be Ben Kenobi's lightsaber, which of course Luke's Return of the Jedi one closely resembles. So my own interpretation here for the pixel art one borrows pieces and ideas from each of these. I'm just kind of cherry picking the things that I like and also creating some of my own details too. After getting all the line work into place, I dropped in that gray tone as a backdrop for the whole thing, then ran through with the light tone to kind of pop out a few details and reflections, And in doing that, I think it also helps give a bit more depth and clarity to all these little pieces that are within it. Now that the artwork for the hilt has been worked out, it's not really necessary to have this giant rectangle behind it. I was really just using that to preserve the space where this was going to go. So now I've added a white outline to the entire thing instead, and we can actually just delete that rectangle altogether. And I think it looks a bit more organic to just be floating on top of the panel like that. And speaking of that panel itself, I thought a fun bit of extra decoration would be to have it terminate into the silhouette of Darth Vader's helmet. It's such an iconic silhouette, and he's the one speaking this line of dialogue, and it just adds a bit of interest to something that was only going to be a solid text bubble anyway. Okay, so with that, we come to the star of the show, at least in the sense of this contributing to the annual Skywalker exercise. So my plan is to make a sprite of Luke that fills out this empty area between those last two lines. But the awkward thing about this space was just that it feels like it's sort of an afterthought and not really utilizing the page in an interesting way. So I'm just rearranging some of the wording here to create a bit more space, and I think it'll also be interesting for the flow of the page to have Luke's head actually overlap slightly with the dark panel above. This requires a bit of resizing, but haven't made too much progress on the sprite yet, so it's a good time to do it. And now there's actually a space of roughly 70 pixels in height to work with after that rearrangement. So I'm just going to slowly build this one up. I'm starting with this stick figure skeleton to get a nice pose together. Due to the fact that there's a lot of empty space off to the left, I feel like the best thing to do here is to have the lightsaber blade extend out into that area. So that really kind of dictates a lot of what the resulting pose is going to be. And I've placed his left hand close to his face. Right now it sort of looks like he's just like shushing, but my intent for this is to do kind of a style pose, almost like something we might see when he's using the Force. Because the artistic direction for this whole piece is going to be like a manga page, I think it's important to also find a lot of stylization in the sprite work that kind of works in that format. And because he's just like standing there on his own and Vader is talking about how powerful he's become and all this sort of stuff, it feels like there should be some sort of cool factor or stoic factor going on with the sprite itself. One of the things I always think looks cooler for his design is to have him in his cloak. And so I'm adding that in, and I've got the hood up, and I've approached it sort of in a way, I don't know if this will make sense, but in my mind, I kind of see it referencing like fantasy artwork or something, where the hood is sort of like, pointy and rigid, and then the cape part of it kind of flowing in the back. Like it looks like something that would come out of like Zelda or Lord of the Rings or something like that. So that works out well. Also, just in terms of like filling out this space too, his kind of overall silhouette. There's still some empty space in this area of the page though, and I'm filling that out by dropping in this long cast shadow underneath him. I think it frames the sprite nicely, and then it also kind of visually connects the sprite to the rest of the artwork on the page. Seeing that in there though, this gave me the idea to actually turn this shadow into Darth Vader's silhouette instead. So to make this easier, I'm just going to rough like a little Darth Vader sort of sprite off to the side, and then use the transform controls and kind of skew and shift the perspective of this layer and basically morph the shadow into place and then tidy it up. I know we've already got the Vader silhouette panel above, and we've seen this idea, done on the poster for the Phantom Menace, where arguably it makes more sense than what I'm doing here. But still, it feels kind of fitting for this context as well, and I just couldn't resist trying this out. Well, that's the last bit, so let's go take a look at the completed manga page for this year's Skywalker sprite. Here we go. Alright, so one of the finishing touches here was that I've dotted in these stars on one of the dark panels. It felt like it just needed a little bit more in that area, and I think that bit of texture just kind of keeps things interesting in that spot. Now for Luke's sprite, one of the last little bits of retouching I did was just finding ways to kind of further exaggerate the style of the pose. Again, working with this kind of manga stylization idea. So you can see how that second last one I landed on, I just sort of pushed the limbs out a little further than they were originally, just to kind of really squeeze a bit more style out of that pose. Or at the very least, you know, you can kind of play those 2 frames back to back faster and it kind of looks like he's dancing too. So the final thing then is to add him into the roster, and now we're looking at the first 10 years of this strange little pixel art exercise that continues to go on. My favorite thing about this series as it continues is just seeing the variety and styles across the years. And in that way, I think the sprite from this year actually brings something kind of refreshing to the roster, being this sort of like lo-fi manga kind of look. Haven't done that before. If I had to pick a favorite out of all of these, I think the one from last year on a technical level looks great, if that's what we're considering. I love the animation from 2021. I think that was pretty ambitious. The 2022 sprite is in a style that resembles the game that I'm working on, so there's some obvious bias there also. But I don't know. Let me know if you've got a personal favorite, or you know, maybe it's just about the journey as it rolls along, and that's fine too. All right, so we'll of course close out with some CRT time. I appreciate you joining me once again for this, and thank you for watching, and take care and keep it square.